Alright everyone, we start off today first and foremost with a little update. Of course, this is now my new little office space here in the Netherlands. It's not finished. I realize that you'll hear a fan noise through the microphone. I am going to be investing in an external screen as well, so I can get the jet engine fans of the Alienware further away from the microphone. So that's really what the audio problem has been for quite some time. I finally got to make that investment. First and foremost, before I get into this unfortunate video that I shouldn't really have to make, and it shows spinelessness among some Republicans, although there is a strategic backdrop behind it, we'll get into that as well. Keep in mind, there will be a pinned comment down below if you're watching this video on YouTube with links to 4 other video hosting sites that I use. I make 2 exclusive videos a day on those sites that don't end up on YouTube due to content, my opinions on content, or simply because I don't want to put 4 videos on YouTube because then the algorithms punish you more. Now, this is about the infrastructure bill, but it's not really an infrastructure bill. To be clear, most of the proposals in this bill have nothing to do with critical infrastructure. It's not highways and trains and stuff like that like Buttigieg wants to run. It's not about that. One part of the bill that was inserted not that long ago, and Ted Cruz, the later tater, of course, finally coming out and complaining about it, is actually an attempt to corporatize cryptocurrency, to make it so that all of the mining that people do, all of the exchanges and stuff, if they're not one of the big boys, like at the very top, they'll end up getting gobbled up by the big boys because only the big boys will ever be treated with deference by the legal system. Whenever you have a bill that has vague language in it, that is potentially construed by federal bureaus one or more ways, if there is any wiggle room, it was not inserted into that bill for benevolent purposes. It is a kickback to big corporations. That particular part of the bill should be stripped out from it. Not a single Republican should have voted to limit debate on this, but they're trying to fast track it. Now the strategy comes in, and this is what people are thinking with McConnell, because he voted in favor of limiting debate so that it'll come up for an actual vote quicker. They're thinking that the whole idea is you get the Republicans aboard to advance it. It goes up for vote. They defeat it. It doesn't get the 60 votes that it needs. It then goes through the reconciliation process and gets trimmed down further. That's the strategy behind it. But my question is this: why do the Republicans want to vote in favor of any infrastructure deal? It's simply not necessary. If the Republicans had balls, what they would do is they would instead go for a deregulation system, something like Trump did, and spur private investment. Federal investment into these projects does not work. We tried this before. We were sold the same basic pig in a poke back at the end of the 2000s and early 2010s with Shovel Ready. Barack Obama announced billions and billions and billions of dollars for very similar things. Well, we'll invest in green energy. We're going to invest in road projects. We're going to invest in bridges. It'll be great. It'll spur the economy. It didn't bring a return. Essentially what it amounted to was pork barrel pet projects for donors. That's what Shovel Ready was. You remember Solyndra, among other groups. It didn't work. It wasn't the New Deal. It wasn't electrification. It wasn't the transatlantic railroad. The thing is, the government no longer really does those things anymore. When we look at the great infrastructure works of the past, by and large, they were private endeavors. They were simply the government primed the pump and then sat back and let private entities compete. And even then there were efficiency problems. The problem is the government can never attain 100% efficiency. Certainly it can't go past that. Virtually no federal program ever returns you more than $1 on $1's investment. There are only a handful of exceptions to this, and people still haven't apparently learned that sad fact. Private investment is how to go. The Republicans should be making that particular case. Instead, you have people like McConnell, Core 9, actually, voting in favor of limiting debate, which is slightly mysterious to me. And it looks like, and Romney, of course, it's basically a laundry list of outdated rhinos and a handful of others from moderate districts. Now, going along with the Democrats, we'll see whether their strategy pays off. I would hazard a guess it doesn't really matter, though. Even if you trim the infrastructure, and I use that term very loosely, bill down further, let's say they get it down to $700 billion, that's still more inflation. It's also more investment into nonsense that we simply don't need to buy and don't have the money to pay for anyway. Right now, we should be slashing and cutting every agency, We should be downsizing the government massively. They're definitely, what the hell does nationalizing crypto or corporatizing crypto have to do with infrastructure? The fact is that they're trying to limit debate also in part to keep the public from knowing the full scope of this bill. It's just like the ACA or Shovel Ready or any of the Obama-era programs. We were sold the idea that things are falling apart, therefore we need massive change now. We don't have time to debate. No, you don't have time to read the bill. You got to pass it to find out what's in it. We've been sold this pig in a poke bullshit over and over again. Bush sold it to us for war and for FEMA and for various other things. Surveillance comes to mind. Censorship, that's still going on now. Obama did this with ICANN. Obama did this with Shovel Ready, the ACA. And now Biden is doing it too. The Republicans have the capability of fundamentally blocking it. They could put it through for limitless debate. This is going to cause inflation. What they should do is make the Democrats own the bill. If it gets passed at all, it's through a more limited process that lessens the damage, number one. It gives the Republicans plausible deniability. If you think the economy is going south and they all talk a big game about understanding that's probably going to happen, why would you want to have your name anywhere near the infrastructure deal that's eventually, inevitably going to be seen as partially to blame? Just like the bank bailouts of the late 2000s. You'll remember, we were sold the idea, if we don't bail out these banks, the economy will collapse. We'll have a depression. Well, we had a great recession that lasted almost a decade anyway, number one, so it didn't really heal any wounds. And number two, in retrospect, people looking back realized, hey, a lot of that money went to golden parachutes. It didn't even bail out the investors. So what the hell was the point? We kept these banks afloat. We forced them to restructure a little bit, but they basically ignore the law most of the time, and it began to look like a kickback for Obama's donors. And for Romney's donors, really, at the time later on, and McCain, you got to understand these people all party together. You'll notice that it was a who's who at the Obama's birthday party the other day. It was very funny because they weren't social distancing or wearing masks, despite the fact that they proclaimed that even vaccinated people should have to do that even in their own homes at this point. This is Shovel Ready 2.0. Fundamentally, here's what will happen if this passes. Number one, inflation, which is already historically high, it's at like, what is it now, a 15-year high or something, will go up further, or at the very least that heightened inflation will be maintained. I love it when they say, well, don't worry, it'll go back down at some point. Yeah, but unless it goes negative, the currency is still inflated. For a number of months, you inflated it past the actual growth of the economy by a considerable margin. At what point does it go in the other direction and the currency deflates a little bit and that value is restored? Well, the thing is that almost never happens. They look over the last 10 to 15 years. How many instances of negative inflation month over month, and at what negative level have they been at? Not very much. Mostly, ironically enough, it was after the bailout deal where Obama inflated the currency to pay for his pork bullshit, and then things scaled back over time because they had no other choice. Otherwise, they would have collapsed the economy outright. You'll probably see that again at some point here. The problem is that this time the spending is greater. The spending is greater at a time of greater overall social and fiscal stress. That's not a recipe for success. We've tried it before in recent history. I'm surprised that there aren't mass protests in D.C. What you need is another Tea Party mentality thing. You should have like 1 million people in D.C. right now protesting the infrastructure deal that has so little to do with infrastructure. And even if it were pure infrastructure, let's say that Biden in a cerebral moment said, well, we can't, we're going to restructure this. This should just be about roads and bridges and stuff. We're trying to expand the economy. We want bullet trains and shit. Even then it would be a poor investment because the federal government is very poor at managing such things. Even state governments have problems. It would be better managed at the local private level than any other level. This is what people don't understand as well about the civic concept of the U.S. Wyoming is not the same as California. The transit needs, the budgetary needs, the policing needs, everything is different between different regions in the country. You have vast tracts of the country that are nothing but farmland, and then you have areas that are extremely densely populated and more closely resemble like metropolitan Tokyo. Those two do not need the same things. You do not need a bullet train to go through Cheyenne. You don't need a bullet train in Burlington, Vermont. In areas where you could justify building such infrastructure, it would require enormous amounts of federal investment to link them up to one another to make them truly useful. Well, that's great. The problem is we already have planes. We're in the age of air travel, and people are talking about building maglev trains, like a transatlantic freight shipping and stuff 2.0, and it really just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The United States is a vast geographic territory, and that's just on the infrastructure end. But all the other stuff in the bill, most of the bill isn't even about infrastructure. That's just how it's being sold to people. So the Republicans that have voted in favor, this link in the description, archived of course, all of them should be out. Yes, McConnell should probably be primaried out of his position. Now, of course, he's reasonably good at strategy, but the problem is the risk in fast-tracking this, limiting debate, not getting your say in on why the bill is a shitty idea, and there are alternatives like doing nothing, privatization, deregulation, a much more streamlined bill that simply has to do with infrastructure, which would cost less than half as much as this one if you really wanted to make that shitty investment at all. The Republicans don't seem to be willing to do that. Rand Paul right now is the voice in the woods from the Republican Party. Rand Paul and Ted Cruz basically vying to be, the non-exiled version of Donald Trump at the moment, and being some of the only sane people in the GOP, at least at the Senate level. That's about all. Peace out.